All around the world, there are ancient places that don't fit the story we were taught about the past. Stone structures too precise for simple tools, cities buried under sand, observatories built without machines, and monuments aligned with the stars. In this video, we explore lost civilizations, forgotten technologies, and mysteries that scientists are still trying to explain. These are real places, real discoveries, and real questions that have no easy answers. So relax, listen closely, and step into the hidden side of human history. Baalbek and the stones that seem impossible to move. In the fertile Bekaa Valley of modern-day Lebanon, surrounded by distant mountains and ancient trade routes, there stands a massive stone platform whose scale and weight continue to challenge engineers, historians, and archaeologists even today. This place is Baalbek. Known in Roman times as Heliopolis, the city of the sun, Baalbek was once one of the most important religious centres in the Roman Empire, famous for its enormous temples and monumental architecture. But beneath the elegant columns and decorated walls lies something far more puzzling. A foundation built from some of the largest stone blocks ever used in human construction. At the heart of this mystery are three enormous limestone blocks known as the Trilithon, each measuring roughly 20 metres in length, 4 metres in height, and 4 metres in width, and each weighing an estimated 800 to 1,000 tons. These stones are so massive that even modern cranes would struggle to lift and position them safely. Yet more than 2,000 years ago, they were quarried, transported, and placed with remarkable precision into the temple platform. Nearby, in an ancient quarry just a short distance from the site, lie even larger unfinished stones, including the famous Stone of the Pregnant Woman, and more recently discovered blocks that may weigh over 1,600 tons, making them among the heaviest stones ever cut by humans. These blocks were carved directly from solid bedrock, separated with clean lines, and shaped with flat surfaces and sharp edges, showing that ancient workers possessed advanced stone cutting techniques and deep knowledge of limestone behaviour. The mystery begins with transportation. How were these massive stones moved from the quarry to the construction site across uneven ground without steel rails, engines, or hydraulic systems? Traditional theories suggest the use of wooden rollers, sledges, lubricated paths, ropes, and hundreds or even thousands of workers pulling in coordinated teams. Some propose the use of earthen ramps and temporary roads built specifically for the task. While these methods are physically possible in theory, no surviving traces of such massive infrastructure have been found, and experimental reconstructions have struggled to reproduce similar feats at this scale. Even more puzzling is the placement. The trilithon stones were not simply dropped into position, they were fitted with extraordinary accuracy into an already existing wall, aligned horizontally and vertically with minimal gaps. This required careful measurement, controlled lifting, and fine adjustment at a level that would be difficult even with modern equipment. Some engineers believe that the builders used a gradual lifting system involving soil ramps, levers, and incremental placement, raising the stones little by little until they reached their final position. Others suggest that the platform may predate Roman construction, and that later builders incorporated older foundations into their temple complex. This theory is supported by stylistic differences between the massive base blocks and the more refined Roman structures above. If true, it would mean that an earlier, poorly understood civilization may have been responsible for the largest stones, with the Romans later building upon their work. However, direct evidence for this remains limited. Baalbek also demonstrates deep understanding of structural stability. The massive stones form a base capable of distributing weight evenly and resisting earthquakes, which are common in the region. Their size reduces the number of joints, making the structure stronger and more durable over time. This suggests that the builders were thinking not only about construction, but about longevity. Why were such enormous stones used at all? Smaller blocks would have been easier to handle. Some researchers believe the size was symbolic, meant to demonstrate imperial power and divine authority. Others argue that it was practical, creating a foundation that would never shift or collapse. There is also the possibility that ancient builders possessed organizational systems capable of mobilizing thousands of workers over long periods, supported by food supply networks, skilled supervisors, and precise planning. Baalbek reminds us that ancient societies were capable of extraordinary coordination when motivated by religion, politics, and prestige. Over centuries, earthquakes, invasions, and environmental changes damaged parts of the complex, yet the massive foundation remains largely intact. The trilithon stones still sit where they were placed 2,000 years ago, unmoved by time. Standing before them today, visitors often feel a sense of disbelief. These stones were shaped and moved by people with no engines, no electricity, and no modern machines. They represent the limits of human strength, organisation, and ingenuity pushed to their extreme. The mystery of Baalbek is not that it exists, it is that it exists at all. Through these stones, the ancient builders continue to ask us a simple question: how much are we still underestimating the past? Tiahuanaco and the civilization that rose above the Andes. High on the windswept plateau of western Bolivia, near the southern shores of Lake Titicaca, there lies an ancient city built at an altitude of nearly 4,000 meters above sea level, in an environment where oxygen is thin, temperatures are harsh, and survival itself is a daily challenge. This place is known as Tiahuanaco, or Tiwanaku, one of the most important and mysterious archaeological sites in South America. Long before the rise of the Inca Empire, long before European contact, and long before modern nations existed in the region, Tiwanaku stood as the political, religious, and cultural heart of a powerful Andean civilization that dominated large parts of the highlands. At its peak between roughly 500 and 1000 CE, the city supported tens of thousands of people and controlled trade networks stretching across mountains, valleys, and coastal regions. What makes Tiahuanaco extraordinary is not only its location in such an extreme environment, but also the precision and sophistication of its stone architecture. The site contains massive platforms, ceremonial plazas, temples, and gateways built from enormous blocks of andesite and sandstone, some weighing more than 100 tons. These stones were quarried from distant mountains and transported across rugged terrain without the use of wheels, draft animals, or metal tools. Yet they were shaped with such accuracy that many joints resemble modern machine work. Some blocks feature perfectly straight edges, right angles, and smooth surfaces that fit together tightly without mortar. Among the most famous structures at Tiahuanaco is the Gateway of the Sun, a massive carved stone portal decorated with complex symbolic imagery and astronomical motifs. The gateway appears to function as both a ceremonial monument and a calendar system, reflecting deep knowledge of solar cycles and seasonal changes essential for high-altitude agriculture. Nearby, the Kalasasaya Temple and the semi-subterranean court reveal advanced understanding of geometry, spatial alignment, and ceremonial design. Another remarkable feature of Tiahuanaco is its use of standardized stone blocks. Many pieces were cut to nearly identical dimensions, allowing them to be assembled like parts of a giant architectural system. Some blocks contain precisely drilled holes and grooves, likely used for metal clamps that once held stones together, showing that builders understood mechanical reinforcement techniques. Traces of copper alloy clamps have been found, indicating early metallurgical knowledge integrated into construction. Beyond stonework, the Tiwanaku civilization developed sophisticated agricultural systems to survive in the harsh Andean climate. They built raised fields known as waru-waru, which regulated temperature, conserved water, and protected crops from frost. These systems allowed large populations to thrive in conditions where farming would otherwise be extremely difficult. This agricultural success supported urban growth, specialized labor, and long-distance trade. Tiahuanaco was not an isolated city. Artifacts and architectural influence have been found across Peru, Chile, and Bolivia, indicating that Tiwanaku culture spread widely through political alliances, religious authority, and economic networks. Its art, symbols, and building techniques were copied and adapted by neighboring societies. Despite its power and organization, Tiahuanaco declined around the 11th century. The reasons remain debated. Some researchers point to prolonged drought and climate change that disrupted agriculture. Others suggest political instability, internal conflict, or loss of trade routes. What is clear is that the city was gradually abandoned and its buildings fell into ruin long before the Inca arrived. When the Inca later encountered the site, they regarded it as sacred and ancient, believing it to be a place of creation, where the gods had formed humanity. They incorporated Tiahuanaco into their own mythology, further preserving its spiritual importance. The mystery of Tiahuanaco lies not in legends of lost continents or mythical origins, but in how a society operating in extreme conditions achieved such high levels of engineering, planning, and environmental adaptation. It shows that technological sophistication does not require modern machines, but can emerge through accumulated knowledge, organisation, and cultural dedication. Today, standing among the fallen stones and weathered platforms, visitors sense both greatness and fragility. Tiahuanaco represents a civilization that mastered its environment, shaped stone with precision, and built a lasting cultural legacy, yet ultimately could not escape the forces of change. Through its silent ruins, it reminds us that even the most advanced ancient societies were part of a delicate balance between nature, technology, and human ambition. The lost tomb of Alexander the Great and the mystery of his disappearance. Alexander the Great remains one of the most influential figures in human history, a ruler who in just over a decade created an empire that stretched from Greece and Egypt to Central Asia and India, uniting different cultures, languages, and traditions under a single political vision. Yet despite his extraordinary achievements and the vast historical record surrounding his life, the location of his final resting place remains completely unknown, making it one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the ancient world. When Alexander died in 323 BCE in the city of Babylon at only 32 years of age, his sudden death created immediate political instability, as he had left no clear successor capable of maintaining control over the empire, and while his generals began competing for power, great attention was given to his body, because in ancient societies the burial of a ruler was closely connected to political legitimacy and religious authority. Historical sources indicate that Alexander's body was carefully embalmed using advanced preservation techniques, possibly influenced by Egyptian practices, and placed inside an elaborate golden sarcophagus filled with preservation substances such as honey, allowing it to remain intact during transport, while an enormous ceremonial funeral carriage was constructed to carry the remains from Babylon to Macedonia, where Alexander was originally meant to be buried among his ancestors. However, during this journey, one of his most powerful generals, Ptolemy, intercepted the funeral procession and redirected it to Egypt, recognizing that possession of Alexander's body would strengthen his claim to rule, and the remains were first taken to Memphis before being transferred to Alexandria, the city founded by Alexander himself, where a monumental tomb complex known as the Soma, or Sema, was constructed to house his body. For several centuries, this tomb became one of the most famous landmarks in the ancient Mediterranean world, visited by Greek scholars, Roman emperors, and foreign dignitaries, with historical records describing how figures such as Julius Caesar, Augustus, Caligula, and Hadrian personally visited the tomb, paid tribute, and viewed the preserved body, confirming that the burial site was real, accessible, and carefully maintained. Over time, however, political instability, natural disasters, and social transformation began to affect Alexandria, as earthquakes, floods, fires, and riots damaged large parts of the city, while religious changes during the rise of Christianity and later Islam led to the abandonment, destruction, or repurposing of many pagan monuments, gradually erasing knowledge of their original functions and locations. By the 4th and 5th centuries CE, references to Alexander's tomb became increasingly rare, and by the time Arab armies entered Egypt in the 7th century, its exact location was already uncertain, suggesting that it had either been destroyed, buried, or absorbed into later urban development. One major theory suggests that the tomb still lies somewhere beneath modern Alexandria, hidden under layers of medieval and modern construction, possibly beneath mosques, markets, apartment buildings, or roads, making archaeological investigation extremely difficult, since excavations in such densely populated areas require complex political, social, and financial negotiations. Another theory proposes that Alexander's remains were secretly moved during periods of unrest to protect them from desecration, possibly relocated to monasteries, imperial cities such as Constantinople, or remote burial sites, although no physical evidence has been found to support these ideas conclusively. Some researchers have even suggested that Alexander's body may have been confused with later religious relics, particularly during the medieval period when saints' remains were frequently transported and reburied. But again, these claims lack solid archaeological proof. The fate of Alexander's sarcophagus adds another layer of mystery, as ancient sources mention that the original golden coffin was later replaced with a glass or crystal container after the gold was melted down by later rulers, indicating that his burial was modified over time, possibly weakening its protection and increasing the risk of loss. Modern scientific interest in the mystery has led to numerous archaeological surveys, underwater explorations of Alexandria's submerged harbour districts, and historical mapping projects aimed at reconstructing the city's ancient layout. Yet despite these efforts, no discovery has definitively solved the puzzle. In recent decades, attention has also focused on large tomb complexes in Greece, such as the Amphipolis tomb, which was initially thought by some to be connected to Alexander, but further analysis suggests it was more likely associated with members of his inner circle rather than the conqueror himself. The disappearance of Alexander's tomb is significant not only because it represents a missing physical site, but because it reflects how political fragmentation, cultural transformation, and environmental change can erase even the most important monuments from collective memory, turning concrete locations into abstract legends. While other great rulers left behind clearly identified burial places, Alexander's remains were gradually separated from his historical identity, leaving only written records, coins, statues, and stories to preserve his legacy. Today, historians and archaeologists continue searching using advanced technologies such as satellite imagery, ground-penetrating radar, and digital reconstruction of ancient maps, hoping that future discoveries beneath modern Alexandria or along ancient transportation routes may finally reveal the truth. Until that happens, Alexander remains a unique figure in world history, remembered everywhere in books and monuments, yet nowhere in physical form, his tomb lost to time, politics, and urban change. The mystery of his burial reminds us that even the greatest empires and most famous individuals are vulnerable to disappearance, and that history is shaped not only by what survives, but also by what is forgotten. The Copper Scroll and the treasure map that no one has solved. Among the thousands of ancient manuscripts discovered in the caves near the Dead Sea in the mid-20th century, one document stands apart from all the others, not because of its religious content or literary beauty, but because of the strange material on which it was written and the extraordinary message it contains. This document is known as the Copper Scroll. Unlike the other Dead Sea Scrolls, which were written on fragile parchment or papyrus, this scroll was engraved onto thin sheets of copper mixed with a small amount of tin, creating a durable metal document designed to survive for centuries. When it was discovered in Cave 3 near Qumran in 1952, archaeologists immediately realised that it was something unusual, because it had corroded and hardened over time and could not be unrolled like ordinary scrolls without destroying it. Instead, scientists had to cut the scroll into narrow strips in order to read the text, a delicate process that took years of careful planning and specialised equipment. When the inscriptions were finally deciphered, researchers were surprised to find that the Copper Scroll did not contain prayers, laws, or religious teachings like the other Dead Sea Scrolls, but instead listed dozens of locations where enormous quantities of gold, silver, sacred objects, and temple treasures were supposedly hidden. The text reads like a detailed inventory and map, describing caves, cisterns, tunnels, burial sites, and landmarks, often using precise measurements and directions, as if intended for someone who already understood the geography of the region. Some entries describe hidden chambers beneath steps, sealed vaults behind stone walls, or containers buried near water sources, suggesting that the treasures were deliberately concealed in multiple locations to prevent discovery. According to the scroll, the combined value of these treasures would have been enormous, far exceeding anything ever recovered from ancient Judea, leading some scholars to believe that the list may refer to valuables taken from the Jerusalem temple before its destruction by the Romans in 70 CE. At that time, Roman forces crushed a major Jewish revolt, destroyed the Second Temple, and looted much of Jerusalem, forcing religious communities to hide sacred objects and wealth in desperation. Many researchers believe the Copper Scroll was created by members of this community in the final years before the Roman invasion, serving as a record of where sacred treasures were stored in hopes that they could later be recovered. Unlike traditional maps, however, the Copper Scroll provides no clear geographic coordinates, modern place names, or easily recognizable landmarks. Its descriptions rely on ancient measurements, lost place names, and local features that may no longer exist, making interpretation extremely difficult. Over the decades, numerous treasure hunters, archaeologists, and amateur researchers have attempted to follow the scroll's instructions, searching caves, ruins, and underground passages throughout Israel and Jordan, yet none have ever produced confirmed evidence of the massive hoards described. This absence of discovery has led some scholars to question whether the treasure ever existed at all, suggesting that the scroll may represent symbolic offerings, religious metaphors, or an internal accounting record rather than a literal map. Others argue that the precise and practical tone of the text strongly suggests real locations and physical objects, especially because the scroll avoids religious language and focuses on measurements and directions. Another mystery lies in why the text was engraved on copper instead of written on parchment. Metal engraving requires far more effort and technical skill, indicating that the creators expected this document to survive for generations, possibly until a future time when the political situation would allow the treasures to be safely retrieved. This suggests long-term planning and hope for restoration, even in times of crisis. The language of the Copper Scroll also differs slightly from other Dead Sea Scrolls, showing unusual vocabulary and spelling, which has led to debates about who wrote it and for what specific purpose. Some scholars believe it was produced by the Essene community at Qumran, while others argue it may have been created by priests connected directly to the Jerusalem temple. The truth remains uncertain. Modern technologies such as satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, and digital mapping have renewed interest in the Copper Scroll, allowing researchers to test its directions against reconstructed ancient landscapes. Despite these advances, the landscape has changed so much over 2,000 years that matching ancient descriptions to modern terrain remains extremely challenging. Many sites mentioned may now lie beneath cities, farmland, or collapsed cave systems. Even if some treasures were successfully hidden, they may have been discovered and removed in antiquity, looted in later centuries, or destroyed during wars. Yet the Copper Scroll continues to fascinate because it represents something rare in ancient literature, a practical document created not for worship, but for survival, preservation, and future recovery. It reflects a community facing destruction and trying to protect what it valued most by encoding its wealth in durable metal. In doing so, it left behind a puzzle that has resisted solution for over 2,000 years. Today, the Copper Scroll is preserved in museums and studied by scholars around the world, not as a promise of lost riches, but as evidence of human resilience, organisation, and hope during times of crisis. It reminds us that behind ancient texts are real people making difficult decisions in moments of uncertainty, whether its treasures still lie hidden beneath desert rock or have long since vanished. The Copper Scroll remains one of history's most intriguing documents, connecting faith, fear, and foresight in a single sheet of engraved metal. The Nazca astronaut and the message written on the desert. In the vast deserts of southern Peru, where rain is rare, wind moves slowly, and the land remains almost unchanged for centuries, there exists one of the most mysterious collections of ancient symbols ever created by human hands, a network of gigantic drawings etched directly into the surface of the earth, visible only from great heights. These are the Nazca lines, created between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE by the Nazca culture. These geoglyphs cover hundreds of square kilometres and include animals, plants, geometric patterns, straight lines stretching for kilometres, and human-like figures carved into the desert floor by removing dark surface stones to reveal lighter soil beneath. Among all these figures, one image has attracted special attention because of its unusual appearance. It is often called the astronaut. This geoglyph shows a humanoid figure with a large rounded head, prominent eyes, and what appears to be a raised arm, as if waving toward the sky. From a distance, the figure looks strangely modern, leading many people to compare it to someone wearing a helmet or protective suit. This visual similarity has fueled decades of speculation, debate, and imaginative theories. The astronaut is located on the side of a hill near other Nazca geoglyphs, making it visible not only from the air, but also from nearby elevated ground. Unlike many flat desert lines, this figure was placed on a slope, suggesting that its creators intended it to be seen from specific viewing points rather than from directly above. This indicates deliberate planning and understanding of perspective. Archaeologists believe that the Nazca created their geoglyphs by clearing stones and maintaining pathways over generations, meaning that these figures were not made in isolation, but were part of long-term cultural traditions involving ritual activity, social coordination, and environmental awareness. The tools used were simple, consisting mainly of wooden stakes, ropes, and stone implements, yet the results show remarkable accuracy and scale control. The astronaut figure, when examined closely, shares stylistic features with Nazca ceramics and textiles, which often depict similar large-eyed beings, stylized humans, and supernatural figures. In Nazca art, these figures are usually associated with deities, spirit messengers, or mythological characters connected to water, fertility, and the natural world. This suggests that the geoglyph likely represents a symbolic or religious figure rather than a literal person. Many scholars interpret the raised hand as a gesture of blessing, communication, or ritual greeting, possibly directed toward the sky, the mountains, or celestial bodies believed to influence rainfall and agricultural cycles. The Nazca lived in an extremely dry environment where water was scarce and unpredictable, making spiritual practices related to weather and fertility essential for survival. Several theories attempt to explain the purpose of the Nazca lines as a whole. Some researchers argue that they functioned as ceremonial pathways where people walked along the lines during rituals. Others believe they served as astronomical markers aligned with solstices, star positions, and seasonal changes. Another interpretation sees them as offerings to deities, created on a massive scale as acts of devotion. The astronaut fits into all of these possibilities, acting as a symbolic intermediary between humans and higher forces. More speculative theories, often popular in media, suggest that the figure represents ancient contact with extraterrestrial beings, or was designed to be seen from flying machines. While such ideas capture public imagination, no credible archaeological evidence supports them. Instead, careful study of Nazca culture shows consistent artistic traditions, religious symbolism, and practical engineering methods that explain the geoglyphs within a human historical context. What remains impressive is the organizational effort behind these works. Creating and maintaining figures that span tens or hundreds of meters required planning, leadership, and collective participation over many generations. This reflects a highly structured society capable of coordinating labor and preserving knowledge without written records. Environmental conditions also played a crucial role in preserving the geoglyphs. The extreme dryness, minimal wind erosion, and stable climate of the Nazca Desert allowed the lines to remain visible for nearly 2,000 years. In wetter regions, such markings would have disappeared within decades. Today, the Nazca astronaut continues to attract attention because it sits at the intersection of archaeology, art, and imagination. It reminds us how easily unfamiliar ancient symbols can be misunderstood when viewed through modern perspectives. What looks like a helmet to us may have represented spiritual power, divine presence, or mythological identity to its creators. Standing above the desert and viewing this figure, one realizes that the Nazca were not trying to send messages to distant galaxies. They were communicating with their environment, their gods, and their community, using the only canvas available to them, the land itself. Through this enormous drawing, they left behind a silent record of belief, creativity, and human connection to nature. The astronaut is not a visitor from the stars. It is a messenger from the past, reminding us that ancient people expressed meaning on scales and in ways that still challenge our understanding today. Tartessos and the lost civilization of Western Europe. In the southwest of the Iberian Peninsula, where the Guadalquivir River meets the Atlantic Ocean and fertile plains blend into coastal wetlands and forests, there once existed a wealthy and powerful civilization that fascinated ancient writers and then vanished almost completely from historical memory. This civilization is known as Tartessos. For Greek and Roman authors, Tartessos was a legendary land of extraordinary riches, located somewhere in what is now southern Spain and western Portugal, a place associated with gold, silver, copper, and long-distance trade that connected Europe, Africa, and the Mediterranean world. Writers such as Herodotus describe Tartessos as a prosperous kingdom, ruled by long-lived kings and enriched through commerce with Phoenician and Greek traders, suggesting that it played a major role in early Mediterranean economic networks. Archaeological evidence indicates that Tartessos flourished roughly between 1200 and 500 BCE during the Late Bronze Age and Early Iron Age, a period marked by intense cultural exchange between indigenous Iberian communities and seafaring civilizations from the eastern Mediterranean. Excavations across Andalusia and the lower Guadalquivir region have revealed sophisticated settlements, metal workshops, ports, religious centres, and burial sites that reflect a highly organised society with advanced skills in metallurgy, architecture, and administration. One of the most remarkable features of Tartessian culture was its mastery of metal production. The region contained rich deposits of copper, silver, and gold, and Tartessian craftsmen developed efficient techniques for mining, smelting, alloying, and shaping metals into tools, ornaments, weapons, and trade goods. These metals were exported across the Mediterranean, making Tartessos an important supplier for Phoenician cities, Greek colonies, and later Carthaginian networks. Evidence from some slag heaps, furnaces, and workshop remains shows that production was carried out on an industrial scale for its time, requiring organised labour, resource management, and technical knowledge. Tartessos was also culturally complex. Local traditions blended with influences from Phoenician, Egyptian, Greek, and Near Eastern cultures, producing a distinctive artistic style visible in pottery, jewellery, religious symbols, and architecture. Temples and sanctuaries dedicated to both local and foreign deities suggest a flexible religious system that absorbed external ideas while maintaining indigenous beliefs. The discovery of the Carambolo treasure in 1958 near Seville, consisting of finely crafted gold ornaments, crowns, and ceremonial objects, provided dramatic evidence of Tartessian wealth and craftsmanship, confirming ancient descriptions of extraordinary riches. Despite its prosperity, Tartessos disappeared rapidly from historical records around the 6th century BCE. After this period, Greek and Roman writers stopped mentioning the kingdom, and its political structures appear to have collapsed. Archaeological layers show signs of destruction, abandonment, and cultural transformation in many sites. The reasons for this decline remain debated. Some scholars argue that environmental changes, including river silting and flooding, altered the Guadalquivir delta, disrupting ports and trade routes that were essential to Tartessian prosperity. Others suggest that shifting political power in the Mediterranean, especially the rise of Carthage, weakened Tartessos economically and militarily. There is also evidence of conflict, as some settlements show signs of burning and sudden abandonment, possibly linked to warfare or internal instability. Another possibility is gradual assimilation. As Phoenician and later Carthaginian influence increased, Tartessian elites may have adopted foreign political and cultural systems, eventually losing their distinct identity. Over time, Tartessos may have merged into broader Iberian societies, leaving behind material traces but no clear political continuity. Adding to the mystery is the lack of written records. Although Tartessians appear to have used a writing system known as the Tartessian script, only short inscriptions have been found, and the language remains only partially deciphered. Without detailed texts, historians must rely on archaeology and foreign accounts, both of which provide incomplete pictures. This absence of internal records makes Tartessos especially difficult to reconstruct. Some researchers have even proposed connections between Tartessos and legendary places such as Atlantis, based on geographic similarities and descriptions of wealth and sudden destruction, although such theories remain speculative and unsupported by solid evidence. What is clear, however, is that Tartessos represented one of the earliest complex societies in Western Europe, demonstrating that advanced urban organisation, industrial production, and international trade existed in the region much earlier than previously believed. Today, archaeologists continue exploring wetlands, riverbanks, and coastal zones in southern Spain using remote sensing, underwater surveys, and geophysical techniques to search for buried settlements and ports. New discoveries regularly add pieces to the puzzle, but a complete picture remains elusive. Standing before the scattered remains of Tartessian sites, one is reminded how easily even powerful civilizations can disappear when environmental conditions shift, trade networks collapse, or political systems fail. Tartessos was once famous across the ancient world. Kings sought its metals. Merchants sailed thousands of kilometers to reach it. Poets wrote about its wealth. Yet today, its cities lie hidden beneath fields, rivers, and marshes. Through Tartessos, history teaches us that greatness does not guarantee permanence, and that entire civilizations can fade into obscurity, leaving behind only fragments for future generations to rediscover and interpret. The forgotten mystery of the Chachapoya and the people of the clouds. In the remote highlands of northern Peru, where steep mountains rise sharply from dense rainforests and thick clouds drift constantly through deep valleys, there once lived a civilization so isolated and so well adapted to its environment that even the mighty Inca Empire struggled to fully control it. This civilization is known as the Chachapoya, often called the Cloud People, because their settlements were built high along mist-covered cliffs and ridges where clouds gather and visibility changes from hour to hour. For centuries, the Chachapoya developed their society in one of the most difficult landscapes in South America, balancing agriculture, trade, defense, and spiritual life in terrain where building even small villages required extraordinary effort and planning. Unlike many Andean cultures that built on open plains or broad valleys, the Chachapoya chose remote mountain locations that offered natural protection but demanded advanced engineering and careful land management. Their most famous site, Cuelap, stands on a high ridge surrounded by massive limestone walls, reaching up to 20 meters in height, enclosing hundreds of stone houses, ceremonial spaces and storage areas within a fortified complex that dominates the surrounding valleys. Constructing Cuelap required transporting millions of stones up steep slopes without wheels or pack animals, relying only on human labour, rope systems and wooden tools, demonstrating remarkable organisational ability and long-term planning. Inside the fortress, circular stone houses were arranged in clusters connected by narrow passageways, indicating controlled movement and defensive strategy, while drainage systems and terraces prevented water damage in a region with heavy rainfall. Beyond Cuelap, the Chachapoya left behind numerous settlements, road networks, watchtowers and agricultural terraces spread across mountainsides, showing that their society was extensive and interconnected rather than isolated to a single site. One of the most unusual features of Chachapoya culture is their burial tradition. Instead of placing the dead in underground graves, they built cliffside mausoleums and sarcophagi positioned high on vertical rock faces, often in locations that are nearly impossible to reach without ropes or climbing equipment. These structures, known as chulpas and puranmakas, contained wrapped mummies and grave goods, suggesting strong beliefs in ancestor worship and spiritual protection. Placing the dead in elevated positions may have symbolized closeness to the sky, the mountains, and the spiritual world, reinforcing the Chachapoya identity as people who lived between earth and clouds. Spanish chroniclers who encountered the Chachapoya in the 16th century described them as physically distinct from neighbouring Andean populations, sometimes noting lighter skin, taller stature, and different facial features, although these accounts are likely influenced by exaggeration and colonial bias. Modern genetic studies show that the Chachapoya were indigenous to the region, closely related to other Andean peoples, but developed unique cultural traits through long-term isolation and adaptation. The Chachapoya resisted Inca expansion for many years, using their knowledge of terrain and fortified settlements to defend their territory. Eventually, they were defeated and incorporated into the Inca Empire, but resentment remained strong, leading many Chachapoya communities to ally with Spanish conquistadors when they arrived in the region. This alliance, combined with warfare, disease, and forced labour, devastated the population. Within a few generations, much of Chachapoya society collapsed and many settlements were abandoned. Over time, forests reclaimed villages, paths disappeared, and cultural memory faded. Unlike the Inca, who left extensive records and monumental architecture, the Chachapoya left few written documents, making reconstruction of their history dependent almost entirely on archaeology. In recent decades, satellite imagery, drone surveys, and field expeditions have revealed hundreds of previously unknown Chachapoya sites hidden beneath vegetation, showing that their civilization was far larger and more complex than once believed. These discoveries indicate a network of interconnected communities stretching across vast mountainous regions, supported by sophisticated farming systems and regional coordination. The mystery of the Chachapoya lies not in lost treasure or mythical origins, but in how such a large organized society could disappear so completely from popular history, leaving only scattered ruins and fragmented oral traditions behind. Their story reflects the vulnerability of mountain cultures to political disruption, environmental stress, and colonial impact. Standing before a cliffside tomb or a ruined fortress, wrapped in mist, one feels the presence of a civilization that mastered its environment and created a distinctive way of life in one of the world's most challenging landscapes. Through their stone walls, burial towers, and hidden pathways, the Cloud People continue to remind us that many chapters of human history remain only partially written, waiting to be fully understood. Puzzling patterns of the Bosnian pyramids and the debate that divided science. In the green valleys of central Bosnia and Herzegovina, near the small town of Visoko, several steep triangular hills rise above the surrounding landscape, their symmetrical shapes and straight slopes drawing attention from visitors long before any scientific debate began. To many people passing through the region, these hills appear natural, formed by geological processes over millions of years, shaped by erosion, earthquakes, and shifting terrain. However, in the early 21st century, a controversial idea transformed these ordinary-looking hills into one of the most debated archaeological topics in Europe. In 2005, Bosnian researcher Semir Osmanagic announced that these hills were not natural formations, but gigantic ancient pyramids built by an unknown civilization thousands of years ago, possibly older than the pyramids of Egypt. He named them the Pyramid of the Sun, the Pyramid of the Moon, the Pyramid of the Dragon, and several others, arguing that their alignment, orientation, and geometric proportions proved artificial design. According to this theory, the hills were part of a massive complex connected by underground tunnels and constructed using advanced engineering techniques lost to history. Supporters of the pyramid theory point to features such as flat terraces, right-angled stone blocks, straight edges, and apparent layers that resemble concrete, claiming that these elements cannot be explained by natural geology alone. They also highlight measurements showing that the main hill appears oriented toward true north with remarkable accuracy, similar to famous pyramids in Egypt. Additionally, tunnels beneath the hills, known as the Ravne tunnels, have been interpreted as evidence of human construction and intentional underground networks. These claims attracted international attention, tourism, and volunteers who participated in excavations, hoping to uncover proof of a lost advanced civilization in the Balkans. However, the majority of professional archaeologists, geologists, and historians strongly disagree with these interpretations. Extensive geological studies indicate that the hills are natural formations composed of sedimentary rock layers deposited millions of years ago and later shaped by erosion and tectonic forces. The flat surfaces and straight lines, according to these experts, result from natural fracturing patterns and weathering processes common in the region. The so-called concrete blocks have been identified as natural conglomerate stone, a mixture of gravel and minerals cemented together by geological pressure. International scientific organisations have repeatedly stated that there is no credible evidence that the Bosnian hills are artificial pyramids. Another major concern raised by scholars is that uncontrolled excavations and tunnel digging may damage genuine archaeological remains from later historical periods, including medieval and Roman sites known to exist in the area. By focusing attention on unproven pyramid claims, critics argue valuable cultural heritage could be placed at risk. Despite this scientific opposition, public interest in the Bosnian pyramids has continued to grow. Visitors from around the world travel to Visoko to walk through tunnels, climb pyramid-shaped hills, and experience what some describe as unusual energy fields or spiritual sensations. For many, the site represents hope that history contains hidden chapters yet to be revealed. For others, it reflects distrust in academic institutions and a desire to challenge established narratives. The Ravni tunnels in particular remain a subject of debate. While some researchers believe they are remnants of ancient mining activity or later human modification of natural caves, supporters of the pyramid theory interpret them as parts of a vast prehistoric network. Carbon dating of organic materials found in the tunnels suggests that some sections were used in medieval times, complicating attempts to link them to prehistoric construction. The Bosnian pyramid controversy highlights the complex relationship between science, public imagination, tourism, and national identity. For Bosnia, a country recovering from war and economic hardship, the site has brought attention, visitors, and investment. For supporters, it represents cultural pride and global recognition. For critics, it represents the danger of allowing speculation to override evidence. From a broader perspective, the debate reveals how difficult it can be to distinguish between genuine discovery and misinterpretation, especially when natural formations resemble human-made structures. Human beings are naturally inclined to recognize patterns and assign meaning, sometimes seeing design where none exists. At the same time, history shows that many real discoveries were once dismissed before being proven. This tension between skepticism and curiosity lies at the heart of the Bosnian pyramid debate. Today, research continues and opinions remain divided. No conclusive evidence has emerged to support the existence of ancient pyramids in Visoko, yet public fascination remains strong. The hills still stand, unchanged by controversy, shaped by time and nature, while humans argue over their meaning. Whether the Bosnian pyramids are misunderstood geological formations or something more, their story reminds us that archaeology is not only about stones and dates, but about interpretation, responsibility, and the human desire to uncover hidden truths. Through this ongoing debate, the hills of Visoko have become symbols of how mystery, belief, and science intersect in the modern world. The Baghdad ziggurat and the sacred mountains of ancient Mesopotamia, long before modern cities, highways, and glass towers covered the plains of Iraq. This land was home to some of the earliest urban civilizations in human history, societies that learned to control rivers, build cities, develop writing, and organize complex religious systems thousands of years before many other parts of the world. In ancient Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, people believed that the gods lived in the sky and governed every aspect of life, from floods and harvests to wars and kingship. To honour these gods and bring heaven closer to earth, they built monumental step towers known as ziggurats. Although modern Baghdad is a bustling capital today, its surrounding region once contained several important Mesopotamian cities, including Babylon, Kish, and Ctesiphon, all of which featured massive religious structures centered around ziggurats. One of the most famous was the great ziggurat of Babylon, known as Etemenanki, meaning house of the foundation of heaven and earth, which many scholars associate with the biblical story of the Tower of Babel. Located not far from present-day Baghdad, this enormous structure dominated the ancient skyline and symbolized the spiritual and political power of the city. Ziggurats were not tombs or palaces. They were sacred platforms designed to support temples at their summit, where priests performed rituals believed to maintain harmony between humans and the divine. These structures usually consisted of several stacked terraces made of mud brick and baked brick, reinforced with bitumen and clay to resist weathering. Ramps and staircases connected each level, allowing ceremonial processions to move upward toward the shrine. The construction of a ziggurat required vast resources and centralized authority. Thousands of workers were needed to shape bricks, transport materials, and assemble massive platforms. Kings often inscribed their names on bricks, claiming divine approval for their rule and presenting themselves as chosen intermediaries between gods and people. Building a ziggurat was both a religious act and a political statement. The ziggurat near ancient Babylon is estimated to have reached a height of over 90 meters in its final form, making it one of the tallest structures of the ancient world. From a distance, it would have appeared like a man-made mountain rising from flat plains visible for kilometers. At its summit stood a temple dedicated to Marduk, the chief god of Babylon, where sacred rituals were conducted away from ordinary citizens. Only priests and selected officials were allowed to enter these upper spaces, reinforcing social hierarchy. Over centuries, floods, wars, and neglect damaged many Mesopotamian ziggurats. Invasions by Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, and later Islamic empires altered the region's political landscape. Some rulers restored the ziggurats, while others dismantled them for building materials. By the time of Alexander the Great, in the 4th century BCE, Etemenanke was already in ruins, and attempts to rebuild it were abandoned. Today, only fragments and foundations remain. Unlike Egyptian pyramids, built of stone in dry climates, Mesopotamian ziggurats were made mainly of mud brick in regions prone to rain and flooding, making long-term preservation difficult. As a result, many have eroded into low mounds that are barely recognizable without archaeological excavation. The idea of a Baghdad ziggurat reflects not a single surviving monument within the modern city, but the memory of a landscape once filled with sacred towers that defined ancient Mesopotamian civilization. These structures influenced later architectural traditions, including temple platforms in Persia and monumental religious complexes in surrounding regions. Beyond their physical form, ziggurats reveal how early humans understood their place in the universe. They saw the world as layered, with earth below, heaven above, and sacred mountains connecting the two. By building artificial mountains, they attempted to create a bridge between mortal life and divine order. This worldview shaped laws, calendars, agriculture, and governance. Modern excavations around Baghdad and southern Iraq continue to uncover traces of these ancient religious centers. Clay tablets, inscriptions, and architectural remains provide glimpses into ritual practices, priestly education, and astronomical observation. Many ziggurats were aligned with celestial movements, linking religious ceremonies to planetary cycles and seasonal changes. The destruction of cultural heritage during recent conflicts has made preservation and research more difficult, adding urgency to archaeological work in the region. Each remaining fragment carries irreplaceable information about humanity's earliest experiments in urban life and spiritual organization. Standing before the remains of a Mesopotamian ziggurat today, one must imagine not a ruin, but a towering structure once covered in colourful glazed bricks, shining in sunlight, echoing with chants and ceremonial processions. It was a place where religion, science, politics, and architecture merged into a single expression of civilization. The ziggurats near Baghdad remind us that long before skyscrapers defined city skylines, humans were already reaching upward, trying to touch the sky through faith, engineering, and imagination. Through these sacred towers, the earliest civilizations declared their presence in history and left behind a legacy that still shapes how we think about cities, power, and belief today. The long-lost city of Helike and the night it disappeared. Along the northern coast of the Peloponnese in ancient Greece, near the Gulf of Corinth, there once stood a prosperous coastal city that was famous for its wealth, its temples, and its influence across the Greek world, a city so respected that even powerful empires acknowledged its importance. This city was Helike. In the centuries before its destruction, Helike was a major maritime and commercial centre, controlling trade routes between mainland Greece, Italy, and the western Mediterranean, and serving as a political leader among neighbouring cities in the region of Achaea. Ancient writers described Helike as rich in agriculture, fishing, shipbuilding, and craftsmanship, supported by fertile plains and easy access to the sea. At the heart of the city stood a magnificent temple dedicated to Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes, a deity deeply respected in coastal communities that depended on calm waters and feared natural disasters. Ironically, it was Poseidon himself, according to ancient belief, who would later become associated with Helike's destruction. In the winter of 373 BCE, without warning, disaster struck. Late at night, a powerful earthquake shook the entire region, causing buildings to collapse, roads to split open, and the ground itself to shift violently beneath the city. Moments later, a massive sea surge rushed inland, flooding Helike and its surrounding settlements. Within hours, the city was completely destroyed. Homes, temples, markets, and harbours vanished beneath water, mud, and debris. Thousands of people are believed to have died. By morning, Helike was gone. Ancient historians such as Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, and Pausanias recorded the event in detail, describing how the land sank, how the sea covered the ruins, and how fishermen later claimed they could see submerged buildings beneath shallow waters. Some even wrote that bronze statues from the temple could still be seen standing underwater for years after the disaster. For the ancient Greeks, Helike became a powerful moral and spiritual symbol. Some believed the city had been punished by the gods for arrogance or disrespect towards sacred customs. Others saw it as proof of Poseidon's power and unpredictability. Over time, Helike became part of Greek cultural memory, a real-life example of how nature could erase even the most successful cities overnight. Because of these stories, Helike is often compared to Plato's Atlantis, which was also described as a powerful civilization destroyed suddenly by earthquakes and floods. Although Atlantis remains mythical, Helike was real, documented, and witnessed. Yet despite clear historical accounts, the exact location of Helike remained unknown for more than 2,000 years. As centuries passed, rivers changed course, coastlines shifted, and sediment gradually buried the ancient landscape. The shoreline moved outward, covering former bays with thick layers of soil. What was once seabed became farmland. What was once a harbour became dry ground. By the Roman and medieval periods, Helike had disappeared not only from the surface but from memory. People knew the story, but no one knew where the city had actually been. For generations, scholars searched in the wrong places, assuming Helike lay deep underwater in the Gulf. Some divers even explored offshore areas, hoping to find ruins beneath the waves, but nothing conclusive was found. The breakthrough came in the late 20th century when Greek and international archaeologists began re-examining ancient texts alongside geological data and satellite imagery. They realised that repeated earthquakes and sediment deposits from nearby rivers had gradually filled the coastal lagoon where Helike once stood, turning it into land. In the 1990s and 2000s, systematic excavations in this region finally revealed submerged and buried ruins, including walls, streets, pottery, and foundations dating to the classical period. These discoveries confirmed that Helike had not sunk into deep ocean waters, but had been buried beneath layers of mud and flood deposits, preserved like a time capsule beneath the surface. Geological studies showed that the area sits on unstable fault lines, making it highly vulnerable to earthquakes and soil liquefaction, a process where solid ground temporarily turns into liquid like mud during strong shaking. When this happened in 373 BCE, Helike's foundations lost their stability, allowing buildings to collapse and sink, while seawater rushed in to complete the destruction. This combination of earthquake, ground failure, and flooding explains how an entire city could vanish in a single night. Excavations have uncovered remains of houses, workshops, roads, and drainage systems, revealing that Helike was well planned and carefully engineered for its time. It had organised neighbourhoods, water management systems, and strong harbour infrastructure, reflecting a high level of urban development. These findings confirm that Helike was not a minor town, but a major centre of ancient Greek life. The rediscovery of Helike has transformed our understanding of ancient natural disasters and their impact on civilization. It shows that large-scale urban collapse did not begin in modern times, but has always been part of human history. It also demonstrates how geological forces, operating silently for centuries, can suddenly reshape entire regions. Today, Helike stands as one of the best documented examples of a real lost city, destroyed not by war or invasion, but by nature itself. Its story reminds us that prosperity does not guarantee safety, and that even advanced societies remain vulnerable to environmental forces beyond their control. Standing near the excavated remains, surrounded by quiet farmland and distant mountains, it is difficult to imagine that this peaceful landscape once held a thriving port city filled with merchants, sailors, priests, and craftsmen. Yet beneath the soil lies proof that it did. Helike teaches us that history is not always written in monuments and books. Sometimes it is written in buried streets, broken walls, and silent layers of earth waiting patiently to be uncovered and remembered. Hidden cities of the Amazon rainforest and the civilization beneath the trees. For centuries, the Amazon was seen as one of the last untouched wildernesses on Earth, a vast ocean of trees stretching across South America, so dense and unforgiving that many believed no large civilization could ever survive within it for long periods of time. Early European explorers described the region as dangerous, isolated, and unsuitable for advanced settlement, and for generations, scientists accepted the idea that only small scattered tribes could live in such an environment. The soil was considered too poor for agriculture, the climate was too humid, the forests were too overwhelming. According to this old view, the Amazon was a place where nature always dominated humans. But over the past few decades, this belief has slowly collapsed. New discoveries have revealed that beneath the thick canopy of trees lies the hidden evidence of large, organised, and sophisticated societies that once transformed the forest into a carefully managed human landscape. These were not small villages. They were complex networks of towns, roads, canals, farms, and ceremonial centres spread across thousands of square kilometres. One of the first signs that something was wrong with the old theory came from the discovery of strange geometric shapes visible only from the air. As deforestation expanded in parts of Brazil and Bolivia, researchers began noticing enormous squares, circles, and straight lines carved into the earth, now known as geoglyphs. Some of these structures are hundreds of meters wide and arranged in precise patterns, connected by ancient roads and pathways. Radiocarbon dating shows that many of them were built more than 2,000 years ago. These were not random markings. They were planned constructions made by organised communities with engineering knowledge and social coordination. Even more surprising was the discovery of vast areas of artificial soil known as terra preta, or black earth. Unlike the naturally poor Amazonian soil, terra preta is rich in nutrients, charcoal, organic matter and minerals, making it highly fertile even after centuries. This soil was created deliberately by ancient inhabitants through controlled burning, composting and waste recycling. It allowed them to grow crops on a massive scale in an environment previously thought unsuitable for agriculture. In many places, terra preta covers hundreds of hectares, indicating long-term, large-scale farming. Archaeologists have also uncovered raised fields, irrigation canals, reservoirs, fish ponds, and flood control systems, showing that Amazonian societies mastered water management in both dry and wet seasons. In flood-prone areas, they built elevated farmland. In dry zones, they constructed canals and dams. This level of environmental engineering required careful planning, cooperation, and deep ecological knowledge. Perhaps the most dramatic breakthroughs came with the use of LiDAR technology, which uses laser scanning from aircraft to see through vegetation. LiDAR surveys in parts of the Amazon have revealed entire urban systems hidden beneath forests, including grid-like settlements, defensive walls, causeways, plazas, and interconnected road networks. Some regions show evidence of populations in the tens or even hundreds of thousands. These were not temporary camps. They were permanent cities designed to last. One major example comes from the Xingu River Basin in Brazil, where researchers have identified clusters of towns arranged around central plazas, linked by straight roads and surrounded by defensive ditches. These settlements followed standardized layouts, suggesting centralized planning and shared cultural systems. Similar patterns have been found in Bolivia's Llanos de Moxos, where ancient inhabitants built enormous earthworks, platforms, and waterways over thousands of years. These discoveries force historians to rethink the history of the Americas. Before European contact, the Amazon may have supported millions of people living in well-organized societies. When Europeans arrived in the 16th century, diseases such as smallpox, measles, and influenza spread rapidly through indigenous populations, killing up to 90% of inhabitants in some areas. Entire cities were abandoned within generations. Forests grew back over fields, roads, and buildings. By the time later explorers arrived, they saw only wilderness, unaware that they were walking over buried civilizations. This explains why early reports from some explorers described large towns and dense populations along rivers, while later travellers found almost nothing. The societies had already collapsed and been reclaimed by nature. The hidden cities of the Amazon were not based on massive stone temples or towering monuments like in Egypt or Mesopotamia. Instead, they were built from earth, wood, and organic materials, designed to work in harmony with the environment. Their architecture emphasized sustainability rather than domination. They shaped landscapes gently but extensively. They did not destroy the forest. They managed it. Modern studies show that many parts of the Amazon are actually domesticated forests, filled with useful plants intentionally cultivated by ancient people. Fruit trees, medicinal plants, and food crops were planted and maintained for generations. What looks like wild jungle today is partly the result of long-term human design. The disappearance of these civilizations was not caused by technological failure or environmental collapse. It was caused mainly by disease, colonial disruption, slavery, and forced displacement. Within a short time, centuries of accumulated knowledge were lost, languages disappeared, traditions faded, Cities were forgotten. Only the forest remained. Today, as deforestation accelerates, more archaeological sites are being uncovered, revealing new pieces of this hidden history. At the same time, many sites are being destroyed before they can be studied, making preservation urgent. The story of the Amazon's hidden cities teaches us that advanced civilization does not always look like stone pyramids and marble temples. Sometimes it looks like fertile soil, living forests, and invisible roads beneath leaves. It shows that humans once built large, sustainable societies in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. Standing in the middle of the Amazon today, surrounded by endless trees and animal sounds, it is hard to imagine that this was once filled with towns, farmers, engineers, and planners. Yet beneath the roots and soil, their work remains, silent, waiting, reminding us that history is far deeper, richer, and more complex than it first appears. The disappearance of the Nabatean builders and the vanishing of a desert empire. In the heart of the Middle Eastern deserts, where red sandstone cliffs rise sharply from dry valleys and narrow canyons twist through mountains like natural corridors, there once existed a civilization that mastered one of the most difficult environments on Earth and transformed it into a center of wealth, trade, and architectural brilliance. This civilization was the Nabateans. For centuries, they controlled vast trade networks that connected Arabia, Africa, India, and the Mediterranean world, moving precious goods such as incense, spices, silk, gold, and perfumes across thousands of kilometers of desert terrain. At the center of this network stood their most famous city, Petra, carved directly into rose-colored cliffs and hidden within a maze of narrow gorges. To outsiders, Petra looks like a miracle of stone. Massive temples, tombs, theatres and palaces appear as if they were sculpted by machines rather than hand tools. Entire facades were cut from solid rock with perfect symmetry, sharp edges, and detailed ornamentation, requiring deep understanding of geology, engineering, and long-term planning. Yet Petra was only one part of a much larger Nabatean world. Their kingdom extended across modern Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Syria, with dozens of cities, caravan stations, reservoirs, and fortresses supporting their commercial empire. What made the Nabateans extraordinary was not only their architecture, but their mastery of water. In a region where rainfall is scarce and unpredictable, they developed one of the most advanced water management systems of the ancient world. They built channels, dams, tunnels, cisterns, and underground pipes that captured seasonal rain, prevented flooding, reduced evaporation, and stored water for months. These systems allowed large populations to survive and flourish in places where settlement should have been impossible. Their cities were not accidents. They were carefully designed environments engineered to defeat drought. Nabatean builders also understood how to protect their structures from earthquakes, erosion, and temperature extremes. Many of their carved monuments were positioned to reduce wind damage and control sunlight exposure. Foundations were reinforced. Drainage systems were hidden inside walls. Stone surfaces were treated to resist cracking. These techniques helped their cities survive for nearly 2,000 years. Politically, the Nabateans were skilled diplomats. Rather than relying solely on military power, they maintained independence by negotiating with stronger empires such as Rome, Egypt, and the Seleucid Kingdom. They paid tribute when necessary, offered protection to caravans, and positioned themselves as essential partners in international trade. This strategy allowed them to prosper without constant warfare. By the 1st century BCE and 1st century CE, the Nabatean kingdom had become one of the richest states in the region. Their kings minted coins, sponsored temples, and built monumental projects. Merchants from distant lands passed through their cities. Priests conducted rituals blending Arabian, Greek, and local traditions. Their culture became a unique fusion of East and West. Then slowly, everything began to change. In 106 CE, the Roman Empire officially annexed the Nabatean kingdom, turning it into the province of Arabia Petraea. Although the Nabateans were not immediately destroyed, their political independence ended. Roman administrators took control of trade routes, taxation, and infrastructure. New roads redirected commerce toward Roman ports and cities. Maritime trade across the Red Sea and Mediterranean expanded, reducing reliance on overland caravan routes. As sea transport became cheaper and faster, desert trade declined. The Nabateans lost their economic foundation. Without constant flow of caravans, cities like Petra began to weaken. Merchants moved elsewhere. Workshops closed. Maintenance of water systems declined. Populations gradually shrank. At the same time, earthquakes struck the region, including major events in the 4th and 6th centuries CE that damaged buildings, collapsed channels, and destroyed reservoirs. Without sufficient manpower and resources to repair them, many structures were abandoned. Religious change also played a role. As Christianity spread through the Roman and Byzantine worlds, traditional Nabatean beliefs faded. Later, the rise of Islam reshaped cultural and political systems. Old temples lost importance. Sacred spaces were repurposed or ignored. Over time, the memory of Nabatean identity dissolved into broader regional cultures. By the early medieval period, many former Nabatean cities were partially or completely deserted. Petra itself became a quiet settlement inhabited by small communities, far removed from its former glory. Travellers passed nearby without knowing what lay hidden in the cliffs. For centuries, Western scholars had no idea the city existed. It was rediscovered by Europeans only in 1812. The disappearance of the Nabateans was not caused by a single disaster or invasion. It was the result of gradual economic decline, political absorption, environmental stress, and cultural transformation. They did not vanish suddenly. They faded. Their cities emptied. Their systems collapsed. Their language disappeared. Their name became history. What remains today is their stone legacy: rock-cut tombs, silent temples, empty theatres, dry channels, abandoned cisterns. These structures still stand as proof of what human organisation, engineering, and adaptation can achieve even in extreme conditions. Modern archaeologists continue studying Nabatean sites using satellite imaging, excavation, and hydrological analysis, uncovering new details about how this civilization functioned. Each discovery reveals how advanced and carefully planned their society truly was. The story of the Nabateans reminds us that even the most ingenious civilizations depend on fragile systems. When trade shifts, when politics change, when infrastructure fails, when culture transforms, even great empires can slowly disappear. Standing among the carved cliffs and empty chambers today, one feels both admiration and sadness. Admiration for what they built, sadness for how quietly it was lost. The Nabateans mastered the desert, they mastered stone, they mastered water, but in the end they could not master time. The hidden burial vaults of Petra and the silent world of the dead. When most people think of Petra, they imagine its famous monumental facades carved into rose-coloured cliffs, grand temples glowing in sunlight, and narrow canyons opening suddenly into breathtaking stone architecture that feels almost unreal. But beneath this beauty lies another, quieter world, one that tells a deeper story about how the Nabateans understood life, death, memory, and eternity. This is the hidden world of Petra's burial vaults. Petra was not only a city of merchants, engineers, and builders, it was also a vast necropolis. In fact, scholars estimate that more than 800 tombs and burial structures exist in and around Petra, making it one of the largest ancient cemetery cities ever created. These tombs were not placed randomly. They were carefully positioned along cliffs, hillsides, valleys, and sacred pathways, turning the entire landscape into a spiritual map connecting the living with the dead. For the Nabateans, death was not an ending, it was a transition. Their tombs were designed not just as storage places for bodies, but as eternal homes for the soul, meant to preserve identity, status, and memory long after physical life had ended. Many of Petra's tombs appear from the outside as grand facades, decorated with columns, stepped crowns, and symbolic motifs influenced by Greek, Egyptian, and Arabian traditions. However, once inside, visitors often find surprisingly simple interiors. Behind the impressive stone fronts are chambers carved into the rock, containing burial niches, shelves, and platforms where bodies were placed. This contrast suggests that the external appearance was meant for public display and social prestige, while the interior focused on ritual function. Some tombs belong to wealthy families, merchants, priests, and political elites. Their size, decoration, and location reflected social rank. The higher and more visible the tomb, the greater the status of the person buried within. Positioning tombs high on cliffs required complex engineering and dangerous labour, showing that families invested enormous resources to honour their dead. Yet many burial vaults remain hidden from casual view. Some are tucked inside narrow side canyons, others are concealed behind rock ridges. Many can only be reached by climbing steep slopes or navigating collapsed pathways. Over centuries, landslides, erosion, and earthquakes sealed entrances, burying chambers under debris and sand. Some vaults were forgotten even in antiquity. Inside these hidden chambers, archaeologists have found evidence of elaborate funerary practices. Bodies were often wrapped in cloth, placed in stone niches, and accompanied by personal belongings such as jewellery, pottery, coins, lamps, and religious objects. These items were meant to support the soul in the afterlife and reflect the individual's identity. Inscriptions carved above entrance sometimes recorded names, family lineages, and warnings against grave robbers, showing how seriously burial protection was taken. One of the most fascinating aspects of Petra's burial system is its long-term reuse. Many tombs were used for generations. Families reopened chambers, added new niches, and rearranged remains over time. This created layered burial spaces where centuries of history coexisted in a single room. In some vaults, bones were carefully gathered and placed in secondary containers, allowing space for new burials. This practice reflects complex beliefs about ancestry and continuity. Despite protective measures, grave robbing became widespread in later centuries. As Petra declined and populations decreased, tombs were looted for valuables. Gold, silver, gemstones, and ritual objects were taken. Walls were broken. Entrances were widened. Many burial chambers were damaged beyond recognition. Yet even after centuries of looting, hidden vaults continue to be discovered. Modern technology has played a major role in these discoveries. Ground-penetrating radar, drone surveys, and detailed mapping have revealed sealed chambers, blocked corridors, and buried tomb complexes previously unknown. Some have been found beneath collapsed rockfalls, others beneath later construction. Each discovery adds new pieces to Petra's funerary puzzle. One of the most remarkable finds in recent decades was the discovery of well-preserved papyri and organic materials inside sealed tombs, offering rare insight into Nabatean daily life, legal systems, and family relations. These documents show that tombs were not only spiritual spaces, but also repositories of personal history. Petra's burial vaults also reflect the city's multicultural identity. Architectural styles blend Arabian symbolism with Greco-Roman aesthetics. Some tombs resemble Egyptian pylons, others imitate Roman temples. This fusion shows how the Nabateans absorbed global influences and reshaped them into their own traditions, even in death. Climate played an important role in preservation. Petra's dry environment helped protect textiles, wood, and human remains that would have decayed elsewhere. At the same time, occasional flash floods damaged many burial sites, washing debris into chambers and sealing them accidentally, which in some cases helped preserve their contents. For archaeologists, these vaults are time capsules. They reveal how people dressed, what they valued, how they honoured relatives, what they believed about the soul, and how they responded to loss. Through bones, objects, and inscriptions, individual lives emerge from anonymous history. Yet many burial chambers remain unexplored. Some are too dangerous to access. Others lie beneath modern paths. Some are known only through ancient references. Each unopened vault represents a story still untold. Standing inside one of Petra's hidden tombs today, surrounded by silent stone walls and faint traces of ancient lives, one feels a powerful sense of continuity. These spaces were carved with patience, faith, and hope. They were meant to last forever. They were meant to remember. The hidden burial vaults of Petra remind us that this city was not only a centre of trade and engineering, but also a place where people thought deeply about mortality, legacy, and belonging. They built not only for life, they built for eternity. And through these silent chambers, their voices still echo across 2,000 years of time. The vanished pyramids of Sudan and the forgotten kingdom of the Nile. South of Egypt, beyond the well-known monuments of Giza and Luxor, the Nile River flows through the deserts of modern Sudan, passing landscapes that once supported one of Africa's most powerful and sophisticated civilizations, a kingdom that built hundreds of pyramids, ruled for centuries, and rivaled Egypt in wealth, culture, and political influence. This was the kingdom of Kush. For most of human history, its story remained hidden, overshadowed by Egypt's fame, leaving its achievements largely forgotten by the outside world. Yet today, scattered across the Sudanese desert, stand the remains of more pyramids than exist in all of Egypt combined. One of the most important centres of this civilization was Meroe, the royal capital of Kush during its later period, where kings and queens were buried beneath steep-sided pyramids rising from golden sand. Unlike the massive stone pyramids of Egypt, the Nubian pyramids of Sudan were smaller, steeper, and more numerous, built in dense clusters that formed entire royal cemeteries. At their height, more than 200 pyramids stood across regions such as Meroe, Nuri, and El Kuru, marking the resting places of rulers, nobles, and elites. These structures were not simple imitations of Egyptian models. They represented a unique architectural tradition adapted to local conditions, materials, and beliefs. The Kushites adopted elements of Egyptian religion and symbolism, but blended them with indigenous African traditions, creating a distinct spiritual system centered on divine kingship, ancestor worship, and cosmic balance. Inside many pyramids were underground burial chambers carved into bedrock, accessed through hidden stairways. These chambers contained mummies, coffins, jewellery, weapons, pottery, and religious objects, reflecting complex beliefs about the afterlife and royal identity. Walls were decorated with scenes showing rulers interacting with gods, receiving blessings, and preparing for eternal life. For centuries, Kush controlled key trade routes linking sub-Saharan Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Red Sea. Gold, ivory, iron, animals, incense, and slaves passed through its territory, making it one of the richest kingdoms of the ancient world. At times, Kush was so powerful that its kings conquered Egypt itself. During the 25th dynasty, Nubian pharaohs ruled from the Nile Delta to central Sudan, presenting themselves as restorers of Egyptian tradition and religious purity. Despite this power, Kush gradually declined. Political pressures from neighbouring empires, changes in trade routes, and environmental stress weakened its economy. By the 4th century CE, the kingdom had largely collapsed, and many of its cities were abandoned. Without continuous maintenance, temples and pyramids began to deteriorate, sandstorms covered structures, stone blocks fell, vegetation disappeared. The desert slowly reclaimed the land, but the greatest destruction did not come from nature alone. In the 19th century, European treasure hunters and colonial explorers arrived in Sudan searching for gold and artifacts. One of the most destructive figures was Giuseppe Ferlini, an Italian adventurer who, in the 1830s, systematically blew up dozens of pyramids with explosives while searching for valuables. He destroyed their upper sections, shattered chambers, and discarded countless historical materials. Although he did find some jewellery, most of what he destroyed was irreplaceable. This period caused permanent damage to Sudan's archaeological heritage. Many pyramids that once stood intact were reduced to broken stumps. Burial chambers were exposed and looted. Inscriptions were lost. Paintings were ruined. Entire chapters of history were erased. As a result, when modern archaeologists later arrived, much of the original context had already been destroyed. Even today, many people are unaware that Sudan contains more pyramids than Egypt. Tourism remains limited. Research funding is scarce. Political instability and economic challenges make large-scale preservation difficult. As a result, many sites remain poorly studied and vulnerable to erosion and vandalism. Yet recent archaeological work has begun to change this picture. International teams using satellite imagery, drones, and advanced surveying tools have identified previously unknown structures, buried foundations, and lost settlements connected to the pyramid complexes. Excavations have revealed detailed information about royal succession, religious practices, and everyday life. These studies show that Kush was not a peripheral culture copying Egypt, but a powerful civilization with its own innovations in metallurgy, governance, and art. One remarkable aspect of Kushite society was its treatment of royal women. Queens, known as Kandakis, often ruled independently, commanded armies, and commissioned monuments. Many pyramids belonged to these powerful women, demonstrating a political system that allowed female leadership at levels rare in the ancient world. The vanished pyramids of Sudan represent more than lost buildings. They represent a lost narrative. For centuries, African civilizations were minimized or ignored in global history. Their achievements were underestimated, their monuments were neglected, their stories were forgotten. Today, scholars are working to restore that balance. They are documenting sites, training local archaeologists, and promoting cultural heritage awareness. Slowly, the story of Kush is returning to public consciousness. Standing among the broken pyramids of Meroe today, one sees rows of stone silhouettes stretching across the desert, silent witnesses to former greatness. They no longer shine as they once did. They no longer dominate the horizon, but they remain. They still speak. They tell of kings and queens who ruled vast lands, of merchants who crossed continents, of artists who carved stone and painted walls, of engineers who mastered desert construction. The vanished pyramids of Sudan remind us that history is not owned by a single nation or culture. Great civilizations rose across Africa, Asia, and the Americas long before modern borders existed. Their legacies deserve recognition, protection, and respect. Through these forgotten monuments, the Kingdom of Kush continues to whisper its story across time, asking the modern world not to overlook what was once one of Africa's greatest empires. The desert city, that time, erased, and the mystery of Ubar. In the vast deserts of the Arabian Peninsula, where endless dunes shift with the wind and temperatures rise high enough to melt metal, there are places where human life seems almost impossible. landscapes so harsh and unforgiving that it is difficult to imagine great cities ever existing there at all. Yet ancient texts, oral traditions, and modern scientific discoveries suggest that deep within these deserts once stood a powerful and wealthy city, a centre of trade and culture that flourished for centuries before disappearing so completely that its very existence became a legend. This city is often associated with Ubar, sometimes called Iram of the Pillars, a place mentioned in ancient Arabic traditions and religious texts as a prosperous settlement destroyed for its arrogance and excess. For generations, many scholars believed that Ubar was purely mythical, a symbolic story meant to teach moral lessons rather than describe a real place. There were no visible ruins, no standing walls, no clear maps. Nothing in the open desert seemed to support the idea that a major city had once existed there. However, ancient trade records told a different story. For thousands of years, southern Arabia was the centre of the global frankincense and myrrh trade, supplying temples, palaces, and religious centres across Egypt, Rome, Greece, India, and Mesopotamia. These rare resins were worth more than gold in some periods, and the people who controlled their trade routes became extremely wealthy. Caravans of thousands of camels travelled across deserts, stopping at fortified cities and watering stations that allowed commerce to survive in hostile environments. Somewhere along these routes, there had to be major urban centres. One of them, many believed, was Ubar. The mystery began to change in the late 20th century, when researchers started using satellite imagery to study ancient caravan routes buried beneath sand. Images revealed faint lines crossing the desert, invisible from the ground but clear from space, showing paths worn by thousands of years of camel traffic. These routes converged at a single location in southern Oman. When archaeologists investigated this site, they found buried stone foundations, collapsed towers, wells, and fortifications beneath layers of sand. This place became known as Shisar, and many researchers identified it as the most likely candidate for Ubar. Excavations revealed that the settlement had once been a major hub, containing strong defensive walls, storage facilities, and a sophisticated water system. Most importantly, it sat directly above a limestone cavern filled with underground water, which had allowed people to survive in the desert. For centuries, this hidden water source supported agriculture, caravans, and permanent settlement. But over time, something went wrong. Geological studies showed that excessive use of underground water caused the limestone beneath the city to weaken and collapse. Gradually, the ground gave way. Parts of the settlement fell into sinkholes. Buildings cracked, towers collapsed, wells failed. Without water, the city could not survive. Eventually, it was abandoned. Wind and sand buried what remained. Within generations, the site vanished from sight. To later travellers, the area appeared empty and lifeless. Only stories remained. This natural collapse fits remarkably well with ancient accounts describing a city swallowed by the earth and erased from existence. What had once seemed like poetic exaggeration now appeared to reflect real geological disaster. Ubar's decline was not caused by invasion or war. It was caused by environmental limits and overuse of fragile resources. The people who built the city mastered desert survival, but even their advanced systems could not overcome the long-term consequences of ecological imbalance. Beyond physical destruction, shifting trade routes also played a role. As maritime trade expanded through the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, land caravans became less important. Ports replaced desert cities. Wealth moved to coastal centres. Inland settlements lost their purpose. Without economic support, maintenance stopped. Populations left. Memory faded. What makes Ubar especially fascinating is how completely it disappeared. Unlike cities that leave visible ruins, Ubar was swallowed by sand and geological collapse. No monumental temples remained, No towering walls survived. It became a ghost city, existing only in stories. For centuries, travellers spoke of a lost city in the sands, a place of wealth and tragedy, but no one could prove it. Today, archaeological work continues in southern Arabia, uncovering more caravan stations, wells, and buried settlements connected to ancient trade networks. Each discovery confirms that the desert was once alive with movement, commerce, and human ambition. It was not empty. It was organised. It was connected. It was prosperous. The story of Ubar reminds us that deserts are not timeless wastelands. They are dynamic environments shaped by climate, water, and human activity. Civilizations can rise there. They can thrive, and they can vanish without leaving obvious traces. Standing in the empty sands today, with nothing but wind and heat in every direction, it is difficult to imagine merchants, guards, priests, and travellers once gathering at this same spot. Yet beneath the surface their foundations remain, their wells remain, their pathways remain, hidden, waiting. Ubar teaches us that history is not always written in stone monuments and preserved cities. Sometimes it is written in erased footprints, buried roads, and forgotten water sources. It shows how fragile even the richest civilizations can be when they depend on delicate environmental systems. The desert city that time erased was not destroyed by enemies. It was defeated by nature, change, and human limits. And through its disappearance, it leaves behind one of the most powerful lessons of the ancient world. No matter how wealthy or advanced a society becomes, it is always dependent on the land beneath its feet. The vanishing temples of the Sahara. When people think about the Sahara Desert today, they usually imagine a vast empty land covered in sand, where the sun is unbearable, water is almost impossible to find, and life seems completely absent, making it difficult to believe that this region was once home to thriving human societies. However, scientific research shows that thousands of years ago, the Sahara was not a desert at all, but a green landscape filled with lakes, rivers, grasslands, forests, and abundant wildlife, creating conditions that allowed early human communities to settle, farm, raise animals, and build permanent structures. During this period, which scientists call the African humid period, rainfall patterns were very different from today, allowing vegetation to spread across North Africa and providing stable water sources that supported long-term human habitation. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that people living in this ancient green Sahara built organised settlements and developed complex spiritual traditions, which included the construction of ceremonial centres, stone monuments, and temple-like structures that were used for religious rituals, seasonal celebrations, and social gatherings. Across modern-day Libya, Algeria, Niger, Chad, and Egypt, researchers have discovered stone circles, aligned standing stones, burial platforms, walled enclosures, and carefully arranged ceremonial spaces that indicate long-term religious activity and sophisticated planning. One of the most important sites is Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, where stone structures aligned with astronomical events such as solstices and star positions show that Saharan people were observing the sky and incorporating celestial movements into their spiritual beliefs more than 7,000 years ago, long before similar practices appeared in Europe. These religious centres were often built near ancient lakes and springs, which were considered sacred because water was essential for survival and symbolised life, renewal, and divine power, making these locations ideal places for worship and ritual activity. In the mountain regions of Tassili Najjar and the Arkakas Mountains, thousands of rock paintings and carvings depict ceremonies, masked figures, dances, animal sacrifices, and spiritual leaders, suggesting that entire landscapes were treated as sacred spaces rather than limiting worship to enclosed buildings. Over centuries, these communities developed stable traditions that connected religious practices with agriculture, animal herding, seasonal migration, and social organization, creating belief systems that guided daily life and reinforced cooperation within groups. However, around 5,000 years ago, major climate changes began to reduce rainfall across North Africa, causing lakes to shrink, rivers to dry up, and vegetation to disappear, gradually transforming the once green Sahara into the arid desert we know today. At first, local populations attempted to adapt by moving closer to remaining water sources, changing farming techniques, and modifying settlement patterns. But as conditions worsened, survival became increasingly difficult. Eventually, large-scale migration occurred as people moved toward more stable environments, such as the Nile Valley, West Africa, and Mediterranean coastal regions, leaving behind their villages, ceremonial sites, and temples. Without regular maintenance and human activity, stone structures began to collapse, wooden components decayed, and wind-driven sand slowly buried sacred spaces beneath thick layers of sediment. Over thousands of years, most of these religious centres disappeared completely from view, turning into invisible archaeological sites hidden beneath dunes and rocky plains. By the time ancient civilizations such as Egypt, Greece, and Rome rose to prominence, the memory of these Saharan cultures had largely faded, and later travellers crossing the desert had no idea. They were passing over former spiritual landscapes. Modern discoveries began only in the 20th century, when aerial surveys, satellite imaging, and systematic fieldwork revealed buried structures and ancient foundations scattered across North Africa, confirming that the Sahara had once been a region of cultural and religious complexity. Advanced technologies such as remote sensing and geographic mapping have since identified thousands of potential sites that remain unexcavated, suggesting that much of this history is still unknown. Unfortunately, political instability, extreme climate conditions, limited funding, and ongoing desert expansion continue to threaten these fragile remains, making preservation and research extremely difficult. Many sites are also damaged by illegal excavation and artifact trafficking, which destroys valuable historical context and prevents scientists from fully understanding these ancient societies. What makes the vanished temples of the Sahara especially mysterious is that most of these cultures did not develop writing systems, meaning their beliefs, myths, and rituals must be reconstructed entirely from material remains and environmental evidence. Despite this limitation, the architectural patterns, astronomical alignments, and artistic symbols found at these sites indicate a deep understanding of nature, time, and spiritual meaning. Researchers believe that some of these religious traditions may have influenced later African and Mediterranean civilizations, as migrating populations carried ideas about sacred landscapes, ancestor worship, and cosmic order into new regions. In this way, the spiritual heritage of the Sahara may still exist indirectly within later cultural traditions, even though its original forms have been lost. Today, standing in the middle of the desert surrounded by sand and silence, it is almost impossible to imagine that this land was once filled with ceremonies, music, prayers, and community. Gatherings centered around sacred monuments. Yet scientific evidence shows that these activities were once common and deeply embedded in everyday life. The vanished temples of the Sahara remind us that human civilization has always been shaped by climate, environment, and adaptation, and that even highly organized societies can disappear when natural conditions change beyond their ability to respond. They also remind us that many chapters of human history remain buried beneath the surface of the earth, waiting for future discoveries to bring them back into public awareness. The Lost Observatory of Ancient India and the science written in stone, across the plains and cities of northern India, hidden among modern roads, markets, and crowded neighbourhoods, There exist massive stone structures that look more like abstract sculptures than scientific instruments, yet these silent monuments once formed one of the most advanced astronomical systems of the pre-modern world. One of the most remarkable examples is Jantar Mantar, Jaipur, part of a wider network of observatories built in the 18th century, continuing a much older Indian tradition of studying the sky with mathematical precision and long-term observation. Long before telescopes, satellites, and digital clocks existed, Indian scholars were already tracking the movement of the sun, moon, planets, and stars using geometry, shadow measurement, and carefully calculated alignments. Ancient Indian astronomy developed over thousands of years through texts such as the Vedanga Jyotisha, Surya, Siddhanta, and later mathematical works, which describe planetary motion, eclipses, timekeeping, and calendar systems with remarkable accuracy. These traditions were not limited to theoretical study. They were put into physical form through massive observatories built from stone and marble, designed to function as permanent scientific laboratories under the open sky. The most famous of these observatories were constructed under the patronage of Maharaja Sawai Jai Singh II in the early 18th century, who ordered the construction of several sites across India, including in Jaipur, Delhi, Ujjain, Varanasi, and Mathura. However, these structures did not appear suddenly. They were the result of centuries of accumulated astronomical knowledge passed down through generations of scholars, priests, mathematicians, and royal advisors. At Jantar Mantar in Jaipur, enormous instruments such as the Samrat Yantra, Jai Prakash Yantra, and Ram Yantra were built on a monumental scale, some rising over 20 meters high, allowing measurements to be taken with extreme precision using only sunlight and shadow. The Samrat Yantra, for example, functions as a giant sundial capable of measuring time to within a few seconds, using a triangular wall aligned precisely with Earth's axis. This alignment required deep understanding of geography, latitude, and planetary motion, showing that Indian astronomers had mastered concepts that were still developing in Europe at the time. Other instruments allowed astronomers to track the positions of stars, determine declination and altitude, predict eclipses, calculate solstices and equinoxes, and create highly accurate calendars used for religious ceremonies, agriculture, navigation, and governance. These observatories were not built for curiosity alone. They played a central role in organising society. Festivals, harvests, royal rituals, and legal calendars depended on accurate astronomical data. Mistakes in timekeeping could affect religious practices, economic planning, and political authority. Because of this, rulers invested heavily in scientific infrastructure. What makes these observatories especially remarkable is that they were built entirely from stone and mortar, without moving parts, lenses, or electronics. Their accuracy came from size, alignment, and geometry rather than mechanical complexity. By making instruments extremely large, small measurement errors became easier to detect and correct. This principle reflects sophisticated scientific thinking. However, despite their brilliance, many of these observatories gradually fell into neglect. With the arrival of European colonial powers in the 19th century, Western instruments such as telescopes and mechanical clocks were introduced, and traditional stone observatories were increasingly viewed as outdated. Scientific education shifted toward European models. Funding declined, maintenance stopped, some structures were damaged. Others were repurposed. Many scholars who had preserved observational traditions lost institutional support. Over time, large parts of India's indigenous astronomical heritage were forgotten or dismissed. Some observatories were abandoned, others were surrounded by urban development. In some cities, instruments were buried under soil, damaged by pollution, or altered without understanding their function. what had once been centres of scientific activity became tourist attractions or decorative monuments, with few people understanding their original purpose. Even worse, several smaller observatories and experimental sites built in earlier periods have completely disappeared, destroyed by construction, erosion, or neglect, leaving only vague references in historical texts. These lost observatories suggest that India once had a far more extensive network of sky-watching centres than is commonly recognised today. Modern research has begun to re-evaluate this legacy. Historians of science now recognise that Indian astronomers achieved high levels of precision in planetary models, eclipse prediction, and calendar computation long before modern instruments existed. Comparative studies show that some measurements taken at Jantar Mantar rivaled European observatories of the same period. Restoration projects in recent decades have attempted to repair damaged instruments and re-establish their original functions. In Jaipur and Delhi, scientists and historians have recalibrated structures, proving that they still work exactly as intended when properly maintained. This has renewed interest in traditional Indian scientific knowledge and its role in global history. The story of India's lost observatories is not simply about abandoned buildings. It is about forgotten systems of knowledge. It is about how political change, colonial influence, and shifting educational priorities can erase centuries of intellectual tradition within a few generations. It shows how scientific progress is not always linear. Sometimes, advanced knowledge is lost before being rediscovered. Standing inside one of these stone instruments today, watching sunlight slide slowly across carved surfaces, one realizes that these structures were once living machines operated daily by trained observers who recorded data, checked calculations, and refined models of the universe. They were places where mathematics, religion, politics, and science came together in practical form. The lost observatories of ancient India remind us that scientific achievement is not limited to modern laboratories. It has existed in many cultures, using many methods, shaped by local traditions and needs. They also remind us that preserving knowledge requires constant care. Without it, even the most advanced systems can fade into silence. Through these massive stone instruments, ancient Indian astronomers still speak across time, showing us that long before digital screens and satellites, humans were already reading the sky with extraordinary clarity and intelligence.